Welcome back, Deep Review TV viewers, to the barren winter side roads of southern Alberta. I'm Chris Nichols, and today we're doing our final look at the Canon EOS R6 Mark II. So of course we have done an initial review that was in a beautiful Californian landscape, but now here we're back home. The labs in Seattle have done a lot of the lab testing here on the files as well, and we just want to give our final impressions on how this now full production R6 Mark II operates. Hey everybody, sorry to break up the video in such a jarring fashion. It's Future Chris here, talking to you back in the past with a very important announcement. When we were out shooting this video on this day with all this light getting photos, unfortunately the SD card that took all those pictures corrupted and we lost everything. Maybe fortunately though, because we got out to the mountains later on, retook some shots. They're way better. They're just not going to line up with that awful day that we're actually shooting on. So in the end, it all worked out. But if you want to show your sympathy, subscribe to the channel right now because it's clinically proven to actually make our SD cards last longer. All right, that's it. Back to the video. Enjoy. Now, as I just mentioned, we did already shoot this camera down in California, and actually the emphasis on that press event was really to shoot sports and action. And frankly, the Canon EOS R6 Mark II at that time was basically production. I mean, very, very close. So I would certainly check out that video if you really want to cover a lot of the features and functionality. But the autofocus performed very effectively. We've since done some more testing, especially in low light. That's something we didn't necessarily get a chance to do much in California, so I really want to talk about that. Now, of course, it's been the holiday seasons, and Jordan shot the Canon EOS R6 Mark II for a lot of his holiday stuff, and we're talking low light, of course, artificial light, and he was actually using a really wide aperture shallow depth of field lens, the 50mm 1.2, because, of course, the light there is pretty dark. So we've got lots of kids, unpredictable movement, multiple faces in the frame, and what we're very impressed with on the EOS R6 Mark II's autofocusing is, first off, the face that you choose, it's very sticky. It does not leave to other faces. That's great. As far as accuracy goes, especially with that thin depth of field, there's a little bit of back focusing or front focusing in some situations, but for the most part, the hit rate is on the eye. It's excellent, even with kids running around. So very impressive results, even in low light situations. I would even put this against like a Sony a7 IV and their real-time tracking, maybe even some cases slightly ahead of it overall. Sports and action, just the fact that you can shoot 40 frames per second in electronic shutter mode and still get autofocus tracking as well, that was very impressive and very accurate when we tested it. So we've got a brand new 24 megapixel sensor in the R6 Mark II. What we found now after looking at a lot of the files over this time is it's basically very similar to what you're going to find with contemporary cameras. Other 24 megapixel full frame cameras are going to have very similar results here in mechanical shutter mode. Of course, Canon's JPEGs are always nice color, easy to work with, so those are all positives. Now, the EOS R6 Mark II in mechanical shutter mode can shoot 12 frames per second as a burst rate with full tracking autofocus. That is very impressive, handles most sporting situations, and so frankly, you're probably going to stay in that mode for most of your shooting. Now, the EOS R6 Mark II does not have a stacked sensor, and what that's going to actually do is cause an image quality loss when we drop down electronic shutter mode. In fact, that image quality loss is present in stacked sensors as well, but if you look at the Canon EOS R3, also a 24 megapixel but stacked sensor, when that goes to electronic shutter mode, the image quality loss is minimal and it's very usable. On the EOS R6 Mark II, there is going to be a loss of dynamic range when you go from your mechanical shutter to your electronic shutter, and it's roughly about 2 stops noisier shadows when you shoot electronic shutter mode. Now, in low contrast scenes or scenes where you just don't worry about it, you're gonna be fine. But if you wanna boost those shadows, if you wanna push that dynamic range, just remember in electronic shutter mode, it's gonna be noisier. Now, that all being said, I still feel like there's lots of situations where I would use the 40 frame per second electronic shutter mode. I mean, here's the thing, you don't always need to worry about dynamic range in all situations, and you know, there's a lot of cameras out there that feature these really fast burst rates in electronic shutter mode, but with heavy compromises like brutal rolling shutter or, you know, basically autofocus locking up. But the Canon EOS R6 Mark II, the autofocus still fully tracks even up to 40 frames per second. And beyond that, the rolling shutter results, even though it's not a stacked chip, are actually quite good. They're just under 60th of a second. Now, what this means is you can shoot sports and action in electronic shutter mode, and you're not going to get rough diagonals and brutal rolling shutter results. Maybe golf swings and really extreme action, you might have problems, but there's a lot of sporting events where it works very well. And that 40 frame per second can be a very useful technique when you want to get that specific decisive moment So other than situations where, yeah, you might get some flicker with artificial lighting or really extreme movement might cause some rolling shutter issues, I would absolutely use that 40 frame per second electronic shutter mode very happily. It's not a gimmick, it's very usable. Otherwise, you'll find the mechanical shutter mode will take care of most of your situations, and then there's no image quality or rolling shutter loss to worry about. So that's it for photos. Why don't we talk to Jordan now about any differences we found now with video in the latest camera.
All right, it's Jordan here to talk about the video performance of the R6 Mark II. And if you've seen our previous video, that's where we walked through a bunch of the features. I want to talk about how they actually perform. Let's start with the image quality on this. I was actually very impressed to see that we're getting detailed, oversampled 4K, whether you go from 24 frames all the way up to 60 frames per second. Usually in this class of cameras, we see a real image quality penalty, whether it's a crop or we move over to line skipping when recording 4K 60, but we're seeing similar detail levels all the way through. Now, there was a 4K 60 mode with a very minor crop in the original R6, but it was really held back by actually really bad rolling shutter performance, 30 milliseconds. Here we're getting nearly half that rate. It is dramatically improved. So overall, it's just much better video quality than what we saw before. And if you're looking to shoot 4K 60, it's best in class. Now, I've been giving Canon a hard time about their video autofocus performance for a long time, in that it just always seems to want to jump to an object in the foreground or an object of the background while you're recording. And if something comes in between you and the camera, you would often see it drift off into a foreground subject, background subject. So now they've given you a new mode, and that is that it will only focus on subjects that it detects. And it can detect subjects like humans, birds, vehicles. Any of those, the focus is not going to drift off when the subject leaves the frame. This is also going to look really cinematic if someone does just walk off the frame. You're not going to see the focus suddenly snap to the background on it. But if you're shooting a person presenting to camera, this makes the video autofocus just a lot more confident. You don't have to babysit it, constantly tapping on your subject to keep the focus on them. This actually makes it a pretty good performing camera as long as you're focusing on subjects the camera can detect. For inanimate objects like this example here where we're telling it to focus on a camera, you will still find it drifting off and finding other subjects. So just be aware of that. Primarily shooting humans though, this is much improved. So especially now that I'm using the subject detection only for autofocus, that makes the R6 Mark II a very capable video camera. Now, when we did our initial review of the R6 Mark II, its primary competition was the Sony a7 IV, and I certainly prefer the R6 II as a video camera. You've got that much reduced rolling shutter, no crop in 4K 60, although I would still say the Sony has slightly stickier autofocus, but since that has come out, Panasonic has released the S5 II, and this is a very compelling package. I think Panasonic have the best video assist tools and features, things like open gate recording, waveforms, and their Achilles heel has always been autofocus, but now the S5 Mark II is actually a very competent autofocus performer. So if you're primarily looking for a video camera, I think the S5 II makes more sense, especially at its lower price. But if you're planning to tackle, fast-moving photographic subjects, but still want a video camera that's quite capable, R6 II makes a ton of sense.
So, when I first played with the Canon EOS R6 Mark II, I was very impressed, but we were really using it in a sports action situation, which I think it actually does a fantastic job for. The closest competition with the EOS R6 Mark II is going to be the Sony a7 IV, and I think I would probably still go a Sony a7 IV for regular photography. I like the higher resolution of the sensor. The autofocusing is still excellent. The camera handles just fine. With the Canon, though, I prefer the body. I like the handle, I like the grip, I like the menus, I like the autofocusing interface better. I like the lenses that Canon offers, but I still think Sony has a distinct advantage having all that extra third-party lens support. But I still think overall, if I was going to choose a camera for sports and action, it would be the EOS R6 Mark II if that was my main emphasis. If I was going to choose it more for general photography, maybe the Sony a7 IV gives you more advantages. But I could honestly happily use either one and really enjoy the experience. But thanks for joining us today for the video. Leave your comments below and let us know what you think. Subscribe to the channel, Instagram, Twitter, do all that. But otherwise, from Jordan and myself, thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon with another episode of DP Review TV.